Hello, it's Adrian here from Arcade Attack, and welcome to the latest podcast. Today I'm joined with Matt Pritchard, a true Age of Empires legend. In this great interview, Matt talks about working on all the titles, how he had to compete against 46 other RTS games at the time. He talks about working at Microsoft, Ensemble Studios, loads of little stories about, little hidden Easter eggs in the games. So much to get your teeth into. Plus, towards the end of the interview, he also talks about his time working at Valve and his views on a potential Half-Life 3. So sit back and enjoy a really lovely interview with a real retro gaming legend.
Welcome to Arcade Attack. A retro gaming podcast for up to 4 players.
Welcome back, listeners. It's Adrian here from the Arcade Attack podcast. I've got another really special guest today, a real Age of Empires legend, an Ensemble legend, Microsoft legend, Matt Pritchard. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Adrian. Glad to be with you.
I've spoken to Ed Freeze before in the past. We've had other sort of developers on the game, like text interviews on Arcade Attack, but it's a real honour, Matt. So thank you. Age of Empires was part of my growing up, actually, so I can't wait to talk to you further about that.
Well, thank you for having me on. Let's get started.
Yeah. So, could I start by asking how did you actually get the opportunity to enter the video game industry, and do you remember the first sort of official game you ever worked on?
That I do, but I'm also going to give you a little bit of backstory information because it applies to a lot of people in the industry. At my age, which is in my early 50s, there is an entire cohort of people throughout the game industry that got their start in a similar way, and that was in the very late 70s, early 80s with the first 8-bit microcomputers, and a generation that was coming of age that had both the inclination and time, but nobody really knew what the rules were, tinkering on these things like the BBC Micro and Spectrum, the Apple II, the TRS-80, the Atari 800. So I actually got my hands on a TRS-80 in 1978, wrote my first game probably 6 weeks after. I can still remember what it was. Incredibly simple, try to shoot down a UFO, which is represented by a block of pixels. Yeah. My first game that I actually sold was a game, an adventure game a graphical adventure written for the Atari 800 in 1982. And like what I myself, many of my coworkers there at Ensemble Studios had gotten their start at the same time on the same sort of systems. And this turned out to be through pervasive at the industries, at other companies where I was at, Gearbox, Valve, and so on. So many of us have a shared background. So I thought your listeners might find it interesting to realize that that early home computer revolution came along at the right time for a lot of people to develop the interest. And in games at that time, starting out before really the industry even knew what it was doing, wild, experimental, and so on, inspired a lot of people to go into it. So I came out of the 80s, having gone to university and off on my own, working mundane programming jobs, but wishing that I was making games. And, I was, prior to making games, I was working a job where I was developing income tax processing software. If you cannot imagine a programming job that has less room for creativity, let me know what it is there to make the leap from there. But I had wanted to make the leap into games, and I actually interviewed with Warren Spector for the Ultima 8 team down at Origin Systems a couple of years before I officially got into the industry. Wow. And this was in the early 90s. And at the time, I was living in Garland, Texas, literally down the road from the offices of Apogee, the people who were publishing the original Doom and all that. And I actually would go, when a new release was out, I would go down to their office and buy it directly from Steve Blackburn, one of the employees there at Apogee. And the people, John Romero, John Carmack from id Software had relocated to be nearby and so on. There was this thing literally kind of happening around me. And I already had, made games when I was a teenager, sold 20, 30, 40 copies. It was still in my blood, but here I am, doing travel system reservation software, income tax processing software to process, the back-end loan origination for mortgages, all very businessy sort of things, but the dream was there. And I was on the lookout for opportunities. And in early 1996, there was a message posting on a Usenet forum looking for programming talent for a brand new startup that was still in the embryonic stage. And this was for Ensemble Studios, really sort of before Ensemble Studios was a thing even. Yeah. And I reached out and made contact with Mark Toronto, who posted that there, told him about my skills and what I had done. And during this time, by the way, though I was not in the industry, I actually had some contact with it because I was releasing a graphics library for the very popular 256 color graphics at the time, Modex. Had been releasing that as free. And I also was writing articles for a brand new magazine called Game Developer Magazine, which had come out in the winter of 1993-94. And I started writing articles for them, I think, with their second or third issue. And I wound up writing about a dozen articles total over the 90s. So it wasn't like I was already dipping my toes in, writing about it, getting out there and keeping my eye out. And anyway, I made this contact, had been keeping my eye out for local opportunities because at that time, due to just having gotten married, I really couldn't up and move and relocate to, a city that was more of a hotbed. Plus, there were interesting things going on around Dallas at the time. So maybe 4 or 5 months later, I got a message back and from Ensemble, and they wanted to bring me in for an interview. And to make a long story short, obviously the interview went well. But what had happened in the meantime was the original Ensemble came from Ensemble Corporation, which was a business consulting group that the Ensemble CEO had created as a company. And there were a couple of employees. They had always had the dream of making a game studio. Tony Goodman, he was friends with Bruce Shelley. And at this point in time, it was people working out of their cubicles after hours, on this project. And in between the time of the initial contact and when I was brought in, they had secured interest from Microsoft and were receiving funding, to get the studio to get it launched. Prior to that, they were just really kind of, they were working on a prototype, shopping it around, trying to figure out what to do with it. So I came in and interviewed with the very first wave of original employees, and in June 1996 came on board Ensemble Studios, and that brought me into it. And so my first modern era game, not counting the 8-bit games that I had made back in the early 80s, was indeed Age of Empires.
Oh, Matt, I'm going to talk about Ensemble and Age of Empires very soon, but just while you're talking about your background, I really appreciate that. Were you quite close ever to getting a job at Apogee or Origins? Was there interviews involved, or is it always never really sort of happened?
I had an interview there at Origin, and I got a funny story about it because I told you, Warren Spector. I interviewed with him, directly with him. I got to meet Richard Garriott, some of the other team. To be honest, the team was kind of underpaid at the time, and they had been bought by EA, so there was a big disparity between, the people who would own the company and whatnot, and they're growing, and they're trying to sort it out, and and all this has to be inflation adjusted, but it was a lot of young people with a lot of burning passion at the time. And so, the interview, I didn't get the job, but however, a few years later, I was leading a panel discussion at a GDC in Austin event that we were talking about Ensemble Studios hiring practices. And Warren Spector came wandering in and was plopped down there kind of in front. And I wound up calling him out for not hiring me in front of this audience at GDC, and but not in a bad sort of way. But I pointed out, was able to bring up the opportunities. Sometimes opportunities missed actually set you up for even better opportunities in the future and so on. But Warren has remembered me ever since for that. And and whenever I've crossed paths with him and so on, and on good terms, obviously, for that. But that as I was able to sort of kind of slyly get him back a few years later. You should have hired me. But in retrospect, Origin Studios, wound up getting wound down by EA after Ultima 9 and everything, and so winding up working on the Age of Empires, the Unknown, was actually better for me and my career and the opportunities that it presented. But you didn't know that at the time. I knew I had the fires in me, but like many a young person starting out, I didn't have the experience to really kind of really understand things as well as I do now.
Oh, that's incredible. I'm a big fan of Origin Systems. That's Bioforge. I don't know if you remember that game. A massive fan.
Yes.
It's a shame. Even Apogee is still around just about, aren't they? Or they sort of changed their name, haven't they? Let's talk about Ensemble. That's your first. I know you said you released games before, but your first official game, Age of Empires. Absolutely incredible. What was it like first getting your teeth into that particular job? Were you there from day one when they were working on Age of Empires? Can you sort of describe the sort of early days of that particular title?
Okay. As I was saying, this was the mid-90s. So, a lot of technological innovation was going on. The transition to 32-bit, Windows 95, and how at that time everything was written completely from scratch, that we didn't have middleware to rely on, and the things that game developers today take for granted. They had put together, Ensemble had put together, its initial team of people on its budget, and at that time the whole scope of things was smaller, but yet we had to make everything from the ground up. So my role was obviously as part of the programming team. I was given the specific tasks they figured out that I'd be best for, was going to be working on the graphics engine and the performance optimization. I had been writing articles and doing a lot of work on optimizing code and even writing things in assembly language, which was a pretty unusual skill back then, and it's pretty much now extinct. But at the time, and again, viewers who are younger may not realize just how slow by comparison and how dinky systems were back in the 90s. My development system at the end of before the Age 1 was released was a Pentium MMX that ran at 166 megahertz, and I had 16 megabytes of RAM. If you think about it, most people, the processor has more cache nowadays than my entire system did. These were on spinning hard drives that were incredibly slow because of all the head seeking that went on. It incredibly antiquated. People tend to forget unless somebody fires up a 25-year-old system and says, "Here, try to do a little development on it," and you go, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" So to describe it at the times, it was an exciting time because, in a sense, we were creating something from scratch. We weren't continuing to iterate on something that a team had built before us or so on. That you might get, say somebody today is hired on by Ubisoft and you're working on the next Assassin's Creed game. Well, you're building on everything that came before, working with all code, assets, legacy, and so on. So in some ways that's nice because it kind of gives you very clear definition. When we were working on Age of Empires, it wasn't that clear about how the game should be, how it would turn out. It was a lot more experimental at that time. The real-time strategy genre was just coming into its own. Yeah. The game, was common that had influences heavily from Warcraft 2 and Civilization. Obviously, Bruce Shelley's association with Sid Meier and Civilization shining through, but also, Blizzard Entertainment's Warcraft 2 was a seminal game, and it really showed, how the real-time could be executed fun. It wasn't the first real-time strategy game. Herzog Zewie on the TurboGrafx 16, I believe, is actually typically credited with that, but it was a case of, where the execution brought it to another level. In fact, it was so popular back then. You may not remember this, but print magazines, a lot of our viewers or listeners may not remember print magazines. Print gaming magazine, I believe, Computer Gaming World, had a cover that came out, the 50 real-time strategy games that were going to come out in 1997. Because all these companies, all these people were like us, influenced heavily by the first Command and Conquer and Warcraft 2 that had come out. And everybody's like, hey, we can do this better. Now, in reality, there were only 47 games announced or listed in that issue, but that was, not unlike when somebody sort of creates a new variation on a genre today, and you see people kind of flood into it. Yeah. To put some context into it, Age of Empires was one of many And originally, it was called Tribes internally. So, we were still trying to figure out, how much of the game is actually real time, how much is resource, how much, what's the right mix, experimenting with the recipe, but also at the same time having to build the code and engine. It didn't really, not till the end did it kind of all come together and have all the pieces there. Some of the things had to be taken on faith because there was no pre-existing game engine or game to work from, to iterate further forward from. So that first one is kind of a unique birthing process. Now, what it was like there is we were a young crew then, typically a bunch of people in their late 20s, a number of people were just married, a number were single. There weren't really, that many, quote unquote, old timers there. There was, like I said, there was a lot of energy being the go-go 90s, kind of the dot-com, people, shooting after the dreams, the sky's the limit, kind of feeling all this new stuff happening. And we worked rather hard on it. In fact, in 1997, I would say, the studio did a rather hellacious amount of crunch.
Really?
For various reasons. Yes, for the last 6 months or so, it was very, very difficult. Now, it would be made up for and never crunch like that again. But we got to remember, at that point in time, Ensemble was an unknown. It hadn't made a single penny. There was nothing established out that. You're out there fighting, and remember, there's 46 other games announced. And and people were passionate about it. But there was also legitimate production deadlines working with Microsoft. I should back up and say, originally, we thought the game was going to be done in 1 year and ship in Christmas '96, not Christmas '97.
Yep.
We made some headway on it, but there was still a whole lot to go. We had something, 9-10 months before that looked like Age of Empires more or less, but as soon as you started playing all that, you realized it was actually quite a far way away to go. Microsoft took a look at it and originally said, you know what, this is turning into more than we thought, but we like what we see. We see something there that is we believe in. And the people we were working with at Microsoft in the gaming division and whatnot, there was a belief in there that, like, this needs to be cooked longer. It's going to make a better product. And, and I got to say, this is one of the times when everybody there gave their all. And it truly did. Everybody's on the teams, their interests were aligned at making the best product. And there was sort of this camaraderie. It was really something to experience. And so, we worked our tails off. Myself personally, like I said, I was working on the graphics engine. There was an overhaul that took me about 9 months to do. That when we came back with the graphics engine, it was an order of magnitude faster than the previous one and solved a lot of these rendering issues. So, there weren't visual glitches on the screen and so on and so forth. In fact, it was written the core graphics engine was written entirely in assembly language. It was a huge thing. What many people don't know is at that time, I was having lunch with another writer, a guy by the name of Michael Abrash, who was working over at id Software. And we'd get together every couple of months over Mexican food. And he was working on the assembly language for the renderer for a little game called Quake. And we would actually, and we would actually trade notes on what we were doing. And I've told this to some people before, and it's absolutely true, that some of his research, I remember one time, I'm sitting here eating, chips on my queso dip and whatever, and he's commenting on some very interesting things that on the Pentium processors, how there would be how the processor would still be running while it was waiting on memory. And I kind of went, aha, and had a little, one of many little light bulbs go off, and went back and took that little tidbit, incorporated it into our design. And one of the things I'm very proud of was when we finally shipped Age of Empires, it ran really, really well on low-end hardware, probably better than any sort of other comparable game. Most games at the time, Warcraft 2, StarCraft, Total Annihilation, Dark Reign, a lot of these others, were all running at a resolution of 640 by 480. And we supported multiple resolutions up to 1024 by 768, and our default was 800 by 600 out of the box. Anybody now looking at their 4K screen is going, oh, that's like postage stamp. But it was a big deal back then to move that many pixels, and it was interesting at the time, that we had to actually invest effort into it. I wound up optimizing other systems like our line of sight system, which I would later write about for the Game Programming Jim's series of books. Things, various systems where we were spending a lot of time so that the game would actually have enough time to not only put graphics on the screen, but to run a decent amount of AI and control so that we could have, a very lively world with a lot of things going on in it. And I touched a whole number of systems in there. But the graphics were probably the biggest thing that I was responsible for. A lot of subsystems, and also our art tools. I created all the file formats, the proprietary file formats used for the images and the package files and other things in the game. And so some of my time was spent creating graphical tools for the artists who were actually started out using DOS batch files, where typing on a command line, and artists are not they're not all that very visual, so they were needing things to see how's it actually going to look, and and if I'm giving you a picture here, it's of a studio building the initial building blocks, starting from nothing, building up the infrastructure, and it wasn't just me; it was everybody else. I have to say, this was truly a team effort. Everybody was giving their all for this. That was again, as I said, it was a really kind of a special time and a special camaraderie. Where everybody was in the same boat together, and they were determined that they're going to make this. Now, to answer another one of your questions, as we got near the end, we started to see things come together, and it really did increase this feel as we were coming in the last 2 months. That hey, we're really onto something here. This is going to be good. I want to see, we want to see what other people think of this. We want to see, I'd love to have a hidden camera over there, at Blizzard when they roll this up. And there's actually a story out on the web when we showed off Age of Empires at I believe was it CS that year at the trade show. You can find out about it if you look for Blizzard talking about with StarCraft. They had their quote unquote Age of Empires moments when they saw our visuals and graphics. StarCraft was originally slated to come out at about the same time Age of Empires 1 was. But the StarCraft guys took a look at it and said, we got to up our game. They publicly acknowledged this. You can find it on the web here. It was reposted not that long ago. That they went back and said, okay, we're going to change the look of our game, and they're reacting to the competition from when they see it. So I take great pleasure in that because it actually helped that it wound up being about 6 months between the release of Age 1 and StarCraft. So gamers, you didn't really have to choose. You could get Age 1, 6 months later you could get StarCraft. I think that helped the audience reception for that. And another thing that was very different back then was we became good friends. A lot of us at Ensemble became friends with people at Blizzard, and later on, we were actually on each other's betas. We were sending a copy of beta CDs over to people at Blizzard to try out. As we're working on Age 2, we were getting Warcraft 3 beta CDs back over. It was a very different game. Corporate environment now would not allow that. But this was the wild 90s. We were all younger, smaller companies, much more independent. And we didn't see each other as like a life or death competition. I mean, you saw your good buddy do something. Now you're like, okay, now I'm going to top that. And it was an exciting time. And I think that kind of the willingness to actually put each other on betas and stuff was just part of that attitude of the time. It was pretty rocking. The .com crash hadn't happened yet, and so it kind of soured the industry. But I hope that listeners here are kind of understanding, getting a little bit of a feel for it was a little bit different era. If you remember it back then, it was. And if you weren't around back then, realizing that that the vibe and the dynamics do evolve over time.
That's amazing. Matt, that's amazing. Blizzard, Westwood Studios as well, incredible competition. But it sounds like there's a mutual respect. Fair play.
Oh, absolutely. And there was a willingness even among various people to share information. We didn't really have, the internet was really a new thing about the time that this was getting started. And we didn't have everything kind of published online instantly like we did. So professionally, many of us, again, like how I, was having lunch, with somebody from id Software, there was a willingness to share. Hey, we're doing cool things. You didn't see it as a threat. There wasn't a trade secret. Or anything like that you had to worry about, because it always came down to execution. Multiple games can be successful in just about any genre if they're well executed.
Yeah.
A few other things, but that the quality of the product, always has a tendency to win out.
I've got to ask actually really quickly, out of those 46 RTS games that you saw that were planned out for the year, was there any you were particularly worried about, that you think all these could be proper competition? Because there's a big number there, isn't there?
Outside of StarCraft, not really.
Oh, fair enough.
One thing, that I can think of the big ones of that era. There's the Warcraft 2 was already out, obviously.
Yep.
StarCraft, Age of Empires. Then there was, Dark Reign and was it Total Annihilation, for example. If you looked at the settings and the dynamics, everybody was sort of carving out their unique niche. We didn't feel like anybody else was trying to directly compete with us, like go for the audience that was also interested in more of like a civilization experience, a historical experience. There were a lot more that were like in the fantasy experience, or especially in the sci-fi. Like downtown, there was John Romero's Ion Storm, and they had a one. It's called something Storm over Gift 3. I forget which, but it was kind of more of a CNC style one. But they were all sufficiently different enough that we felt like that nobody's going to like basically put a clone out. And if you think about it today, like let's say you come up with something that's a smash hit, a Flappy Bird or a 2048, which is originally 3s or whatever. How many clones come out literally almost instantaneously?
It's a joke almost, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and so you get drowned out. But like that, we did not worry about it in that respect. That we thought, we were creating a game that had a great feel, what we now consider a core game loop, interesting decisions to make, and a good sort of rock paper scissors on the balance and whatnot. Something that had some replayability, and we felt like a lot of things were coming together, and it was really the quality of all of the original team, from the art, the design, the audio, the programming. Were really all producing, I think, exceptional results relative to the competition and the time for what could be done. Like there were a couple of areas we got dinged for on the game a little bit, which we certainly came back in the next game, with a vengeance to rectify. But most people look at the original game and you can't say, well, there's this one big weakness in it, that kind of really knocked it down. Everything was pretty good to great about it. And so it was a very, it was able to be a strong contender in the marketplace. And I attribute that to, again, the entire team and what they brought forward.
Brilliant. I mean, I have to ask, Matt, was there any ideas you had for the game or any other future Age of Empire games or expansion packs that you thought hard to get in, that didn't get any ideas that were banded about? And was there any sort of disagreements throughout the sort of different games you've been working on? Or
I'm going to have trouble recalling, but there were so many ideas that we tried that to understand the development of this game, one of the things from a gameplay standpoint is there's a tremendous amount of iteration that goes on, trying things and seeing if they work out or don't work out, if they make the game better. There's so many things that sound good on paper or on the whiteboard, and then you put them in the game, and it takes you all of 15 seconds to go, this sucks, and yank them out. I mean, I'm just trying to vaguely to remember, we had things like archers standing on top of walls. In the Age of Kings, we had much larger sort of home cities and fewer other buildings. We've always had the question about flying units. I can say that there was a design for a second expansion pack early on to the Age of Kings that would have been sort of a myths and monsters fantasy units, which would also maybe include flying units, which I think Rise of Nations, actually did something like that later on. Trying to remember, that we'd kind of go, we already have kind of the Middle Ages setting, and it wasn't too hard to not just go with the Tolkien-esque sort of fantasy setting, but maybe, to introduce elements from, East Asian mythology and, other parts of the world. Our designers were like, there's actually a whole lot more out there than just orcs and dragons that could make this pretty interesting. But that one, for various reasons, it's kind of, that may have inspired a bit, the direction that led to the spinoff to Age of Mythology, and where they wanted to go with that, though change the setting. But it was actually thought about as a expansion pack for Age of Kings. I'll bet briefly. It's as far as other features go, I really wish I could remember more. There were just so many of them. And sometimes features came about accidentally or organically. I can think of a couple where they were like, put them in the code right now and playtest them in today's build and ask for forgiveness later. One of which was sharing line of sights with your allies. Something I can remember doing that was I was in the code realizing, you could share line of sight between people in multiplayer games basically for free. I wonder what happened if I enabled that. We did a play test and everybody's like, sounds great, and then the designer says, we should make that a researchable technology. And in many people actually had ideas like that. We had one of the programmers Tim Dean was sort of the master at game balance and understanding the ramifications. There were so many times that we had to say, okay, and now in today's build, we've made these changes. And Tim would immediately sort of weigh in like, that's not going to work. And we'd be like, oh, come on, Tim, we just got to try it. And then Tim would immediately take whatever loophole he saw and wipe the board of everybody else with it to drive his point home that, like, you just broke all the balance. And, it got to the point with his reputation that if he said it's not going to work, we're kind of like, okay, we believe you, and accept that. But but many people, as the company would grow, we'd have more people that had a really great eye for that kind of stuff. But iteration, we tried so many things. A lot of them would be more mundane, adjusting hit points, adjusting bonuses, and things so that so that it was actually worthwhile to go down research paths, or that the thing when you have such a variety of units in a game, you don't want there to be like the one true path. Just create this unit and spam it, and then the game's over. You don't that search for balance, and as soon as you change in one thing, it has an impact, a ripple impact on everything else, and and it would especially show in the later games where there'd be mechanics of like movement and can you put things inside of this thing. And there are small, and again, other small details that like some people know. Like in the original Age of Empires game, if you upgrade your catapults all the way, they will flatten forests. And so you could build, if you had the tech that enabled you to build it all the way up, you could actually suddenly, cut a road right through a forest in, a matter of 15 seconds.
That's good. Well, yeah, brilliant. I mean, that's really interesting stuff there. Age of Empires 2 is often regarded as probably arguably the best in the series. I mean, would you agree with that, Matt? Would you think Age of Empires 2 is sort of pinnacle in your view?
I would agree with that. And a lot of people internally did. And to understand kind of how we thought about one, in Age of Empires 1, as we were going along, we had so many ideas of things we wanted to do and implement, but just didn't because we didn't have the time, the resources. We knew we had to ship this game eventually. You couldn't be in production, like Duke Nukem Forever and literally take forever. You had to ship, and at some point you have to call, draw a line down and rein in your scope. So the team had finished Age of Empires 1. It received very, very well, and we were growing, and there was the success, so the studio would have more, could hire more people, had more resources, and the game exceeded all expectations Microsoft had. So we had enthusiastic support from our publisher and developer, and so we want to go bigger, and they're like, great, let us know. And at that time, it was just an interesting year because it was just so cooperative to work with them, and because we didn't change engines. And we weren't having to rebuild a lot of that. Remember I was talking about middleware and the technology?
Yeah.
Because we were able to build upon what we did before, we were really able to go after improving, polishing, upgrading, and we put a lot of engineering effort as well as content design effort. Bigger worlds, bigger graphics, improved pathfinding. We totally overhauled the pathfinding and the AI, for example, to the areas that were considered of the weaker than the rest of on Age 1, for example. And with taking advantage of the timeline and the music and having the voiceovers and the things and just all the different aspects of the game, going at it to build upon it, and there was an enthusiasm, a feedback loop in the studio. People hadn't burned out on it. They're really like, I really want to do this. I want to do this even better. I want to show the world, and and then also there was timing for what the game was and when it came out. So internally, and I attribute this quote to Harder Ryan, who was a CEO there at Ensemble, was that Age 1 was a good game, but Age 2 was a great game, and we won a whole bunch of Game of the Year awards and whatnot, and just, and it was, again, partly, like I said, the right game at the right time with the right technology for what people had there and the right topic matter, for broad appeal and the history, and it just like so many things came together. But in reality, it was 4 years of work to get there. Yeah. And building upon everything we learned, and especially also having a game released. Your first game, you only have a limited number of people who can, to beta test it and so on. But once you actually get it out there, you get a feedback and perspective on what you did, that you just can't do. Oftentimes when you're developing it, you're a little too close to the tree to see the forest, or kind of thing. You've been with it for so long that maybe some things don't get you. And then, like the designers, we thought we were good at playing the game age 1 when it released, but very quickly we discovered there are people out there that just blew us away. I myself, I was probably the third best player of age 1 when it was released, and I got out playing online multiplayer, literally. And within, I'd say, 3 or 4 days, I was a below average player. I mean, it just, I was good at beating my coworkers, but people were seeing things and using strategies and evolving, and just rapidly, and being able to incorporate that into our development, it helps, because not only do you want to create a great game technically, you want to create a great game in terms of the decisions you make, the the balance of it, what it offers you, the options it offers. And I think that's one of the things that led to, the fact that for years people were coming up with new and different strategies and continuing to evolve it, and that's the mark of, a whole lot of refinement going into it, to that it could be so flexible. People lose interest if a game, gets distilled down to like, and this is how you optimally beat it, and there's no way to improve from that. And then people are kind of like, okay, well, I'm done with it. I've seen all it has to offer me.
No, well, it must be a really good thing to see. Obviously, people trying these new things that you weren't expecting. I mean, Age of Empires 2, people still play it today. They still play all the Age of Empires, let's be honest. But it sort of attracts the amateur players, the casual players, the real highly competitive. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. How do you have to almost pinch yourself that the game you made a good number of years ago is still played so much today?
I'm humbled by it. And to be honest, it was the being humbled by it that got me involved with trying to resurrect the series digitally. And, because I don't know if you know, but there is a post out there on the Age of Empires Heavens forum that I was the person responsible for getting Microsoft interested in what eventually became Age of Empires HD Edition.
Yes.
And re-releasing it. That's fairly well known among insiders in the community, that while I was, after moving out to the West Coast, that for more than a couple of years I was knocking on doors at Microsoft to see if there was any interest in doing a digital re-release. And at that time they're kind of like, well, that's an old 2D game. I don't really know, whatever. But eventually that happened. But one of the things, I'll tell you, that got me, that sort of pushed me over the edge was constantly bumping into people who had that reaction, that love of the game. I had moved out here and gone to work at Valve Software, which is a great company, obviously, great games and all that. But one of the things that surprised me was several people at Valve were huge Age of Empires fans.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but you just did Half-Life and Portal and Team Fortress and all these others, and why are you being a fanboy on me for, kind of like, it was really humbling to realize, how far and widespread the love and appreciation for Age was. And, and that was one of the things that really helped convince me that, that there's still a fire for that. And then, discovering that, if anything, it never really died out, and there was actually a community growing stronger. Prior to the time of HD being released, I did not realize that independently people were playing it competitively multiplayer. They were still working on even catching the game, and that there were tournaments that even had prizes exceeding $10,000. These were happening, and they weren't officially sponsored by Microsoft or anything, but they were happening out there. And that is not a dying scene. That is a thriving community. And it kind of blew me away to realize that so much was out there. But it helped convince me that hey, there's still something to this. And, these games are worthy of being brought forward into the digital age.
No, brilliant. I mean, you spoke, well, I guess, did you leave Microsoft? Matt, I think you told me earlier that you worked on Age of Empires 3 for a little bit, then you sort of left Microsoft. Is that right?
I left Ensemble in 2004.
Yeah.
And, for various reasons, a number of the original team did. To put it kind of bluntly, once the company was purchased by Microsoft, part of the environment and the culture changed as we were absorbed. We were a studio of 50 people, and now we were part of a 150,000 person company.
Yeah.
And some of the directions, and also there was some burnout that was going on. People had been working on RTS games for 8+ years, and just a whole number of things. Again, oftentimes, why does a band break up and something like that after a run? There are various, a myriad of reasons. But for myself, it was time to move. It was time to move on. Also, actually, I'll end this. During that time period, the mid 2000s, I went through an extremely difficult time in my personal life. Didn't help me one bit, and and there was definitely a need to move on and for some change. But despite all of that, obviously, there's no escaping the love of my life in Age of Empires series games. So,
yeah.
But even the studio itself, a lot of people were interested in doing other things. It was kind of unfortunate because the way Microsoft had their studio system at the time, they sort of had a studio for each genre, and that there was, I know, there was some work there going on, like, hey, we should be looking into doing an MMO or something like that. But generally speaking, though, like, you're not the MMO studio, you're the RTS studio.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of why, like, even though Halo Wars was on the Xbox 360, it was still an RTS. Ensemble was sort of pigeonholed that way. And there were people inside that said, yeah, I did an RTS game, but I've always wanted to do an RPG. Or, I really love to do an action shooter. Or, from a professional point, you've done years in the trenches. I want to do something different now. And that's okay and normal. So there was, I think, some people moved on just to pursue specific dreams of doing other things, and others moved on for various other reasons. So, it's just one of those things that happens. But,
no.
It would be interesting. I meet people who still go like, why didn't Ensemble Studios stay in business? And I said, well, 25 years of producing RTS games would probably burn out most people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's incredible. But you still kept fighting the fight to get Age of Empires HD made. So credit where it's due, Matt. I mean, you, good on you, definitely.
Again, I have to credit the fans of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of thought, like most people do, games from 10 plus years ago kind of tend to fade away. And when I was realizing that, you kind of knew, yeah, well, we had a great game, we had a hit, but how many hit songs actually become a staple on radio, more than a decade later kind of thing? It was very unusual, the response I was getting, like I said, and that helped motivate me. And I had a love of the first two games, the 2D games. Obviously, I wrote the graphics engine for those, and a bunch of other things, but I was more connected to the first two games just from having been involved just so deeply on those, and so that kind of converged in saying, why isn't there a digital version? Although the truth is, and that's what posted, we actually had made a version that did not require a CD. There was a special OEM build of Age of Empires 2 that came pre-installed on Dell computers for a little while, or certain Dell computers. And I knew that we had a CD version that was perfect for doing digitally, and that was part of the original pitch, saying like, why don't you offer up the back catalog? And another thing people probably, if you haven't been paying attention, back then, this was the late 2000s, remasters weren't all the rage like they are now. Right now, we're like, oh, this was really notable game. How come there isn't a remaster yet? Today, so again, remembering, change over time. Back then, it really wasn't on anybody's radar, and especially also the transition to 3D. People hadn't think, well, do you really want to play an old 2D game? Well, the answer was a lot of people were like, oh, heck yes.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I bought it recently on Steam again. It's brilliant. I have to say, it's still so popular. Matt, I've got to tell you, I've got to ask you actually, because I've noticed the first reason I got in contact with you is I saw your posts on a Facebook group. Got to give it credit. It's called the Age of Empires Wallow Wallow posting. It's pretty clear over the years you've built up a huge treasure trove of Age of Empire goodies, merchandise, limited edition games. How can you just, before we talk about the Facebook and sort of the auction you got involved in, how did you come across all these amazing items, and did you just collect them randomly, or what happened?
Well, actually, a lot of them came from working on the games. So what would happen would be is when we would ship the games, most everybody would come around and we get like 5 boxed copies. You have to remember, back in the day, a boxed copy was the only way you could get the game. And I'll put a little quirk out here on this, or a little comment of something that happened. When Age of Empires 1 released, it sold better than expectations, and it was up in the charts, the NPD charts at the time. And then right before Christmas, there was a big drop-off. What happened was they ran out of stock.
Oh, no.
And you had to physically produce CDs in a factory, print the manuals, put them in a box, and ship them, unlike today's digital distribution. So there was a lag time for them to go, holy crap, we sold out, and to get more on the shelves. And there was, that doesn't happen today with everything being digital. Yeah. With that, but we would the employees would get digital copies, and in addition to that, again, Tony Goodman, the CEO of Ensemble, had a culture where, and this was much more common then, we had a lot of swag internally. we were always making new T-shirts for everybody on the team or new clothing items, and there would be awards, like I have a plaque for selling 1 million copies of Age that was kind of done with Microsoft. It's like suitable for framing. It's up on the wall. I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah.
And we'd get some of these, things in Lucite or whatever. There were actually a number of awards. I didn't really put pictures up, but in the process of working on it, a lot of trinkets of our success in the product stuff were actually, sent to the studio because we wanted to actually get our hands on the physical end result, because we didn't make it there. It got shipped off to our publisher, who shipped it off to a manufacturer, and so that's how a lot of that stuff came. And a lot of the stuff I posted was a lot of the clothing. I never threw it away unless it wore out, and I wound up with literally crates full of Ensemble items, plus things that were hard to come by, like I have for the original Age of Empires game, I've got like 7 different language releases of it. The Japanese box, the Italian, the Spanish, which where you were back then, in the United States, you're not going to get the Italian version.
Never.
And so on. So a lot of that stuff came about that way, and it was actually a lot more common than to have swag, physical items made. Some things we would create to go to trade shows. One of the things Ensemble, again, and I go credit all the way back up to its management chain, did was that they would take the entire team to the big conferences like GDC and the CS, the Consumer Electronics Show. They were like, everybody got to go to at least 2 conferences a year. And so one of the things we do is we would all, have matching shirts. So you were there at CS, and I keep seeing these people in Ensemble Studios shirts running around here. They're everywhere. That's because there's 50 of us all wearing our company swag and so on. And that certainly was part of it. And then with the success of it, Microsoft made a number of things too, like I think that appeared in the post, the Facebook group. One of them was I had baseball caps for the various games, and I would get them. I don't wear baseball caps, so what had happened was a lot of this stuff I had put away in crates and boxes and had been carrying it around with me for more than 2 decades. And lately, I've been going on a trend called, if you know the term, Swedish death cleaning, which is a getting rid of all the stuff you don't really keep anymore. Of goes in. There's other things right now, the Marie Kondo, get rid of the declutter, get rid of the stuff that does not bring you joy. But I realize I have too many of these things. There are a number of things I'm keeping that are memories. We have these leather bomber jackets that everybody at Ensemble had but just covered in patches to represent the years you were there, the products you worked on and whatnot. They're really cool looking. Like that one, example is something I'm keeping, some of the awards. But I realized I had so many things that it was time to call these down. And I was on the WOLA posting group for a while. I don't really partake in the groups where, like they're always discussing the minutia of fine strategy or whatever. I found that group to be both funny and irreverent and kind of a good place to hang out to see people who are fans of the game, but they're not not debating if this one bonus should be a +1 or a +2 to death kind of thing. And so I thought, I'm thinking of donating or getting rid of these. I wasn't really sure, and so I thought I'll just post some pictures up there. And then the reaction people had just blew me away. They wanted to see, they want to see more. They want to see more. I better get more stuff out. I can get the lighting, get the pictures, post it all up so they can see. Just showing them a lot of the, the range of the clothing, a range of the items. And I'm digging through the box and occasionally go, oh, wow, I had forgotten I even had this. And that led to sharing a lot of the trinkets because, again, a lot of that stuff was sort of representative of a different time, an era where stuff like that was more commonly made, that companies, would as we like to say, would have more swag to give away at trade shows, more stuff to give their employees. It was just kind of more of a thing you did. And now everything's kind of gone virtual. Everywhere in the industry, you don't see that often. What you do see occasionally now, is much more deliberate. Like, we're going to make some interesting things and put it in the collector's edition and sell it for a much larger price. Whatever. That's about all I do see now. Yeah. But that got me started with the group and showing that in the interest. And I don't know if this is your next question or not, but that led to an idea of mine to sell off some of the things to make me aware to people in the group and raise the money for charitable donations. That
good on you. Yeah.
That we usually, my wife and I, have been making for a number of years. It kind of goes back to the whole Stormy Dog cheat and everything else. But and I was blown away by the community. So I think you have some more questions about specifics that came up from that. So I'll let you I'll let you guide the conversation here.
Well, one of the things that I didn't know existed, I don't know if they came to the UK, was the sort of toy range and the toy trebuchet. And was there a whole toy range announced and released for the lovely armies? No, okay.
So let me give you the story about this. So to clarify what you're referring, there was an item I posted, which was a unassembled plastic toy trebuchet that could actually fling these little plastic balls. Yep. It was maybe, as 6 inches, I don't know, 20 centimeters or so, however tall it is, and it was still new in the bag, and it had you could see the packaging. It was the Age of Empires and whatnot. Well, and the story behind that was from a test run of a toy that Microsoft was making to include with the original collector's edition. The original collector's edition was in a large, oversized box, not hugely oversized, and it was limited to 75,000 copies, and they were numbered. That was the first Age of Empires collector's edition that collected the first 2 games and their expansions. And Microsoft, thought that there were people that thought this is a really cool idea, and they did a test run of these toys, made 1,000 of them, and even though there was a disclaimer printed on the thing in there, Microsoft legal department nixed the idea of including them because of the small parts and the choking hazard.
Yeah.
And it's not the first time Age of Empires was actually impacted by a decision from Microsoft legal. One thing to understand is a company of Microsoft's size and stature gets sued regularly by people, if nothing else, just hoping for a small settlement to go away or whatnot. And so they have a very large, they're a very large attack surface, very deep pockets, and they have, they take a very conservative and careful attitude not to just like open themselves up for yet another lawsuit to come up against them. So that nixed the idea of the trebuchet toys, and instead a pack of trading cards was, I believe, what was included with the 75,000 collector's editions. Now, what to do with that 1,000? Well, they shipped a bunch of them down to Ensemble Studios. They went around the office offering everybody to take up to 5 each. And actually, over the years, I'd given away a couple of them, and I think I'm down to my last one. I might have another one buried. I don't know if it was 4 or 5, but I think that was all of them. But this was a toy this was an official Microsoft toy. It was going to wind up in there until another part of Microsoft, remember it's a gigantic corporation, said, we ain't doing that. They don't want to deal with the lawsuits coming from that. And so they were just kind of, well, what do we do with these? Well, let's just give them to some of the dev team, give them to some of the, the people on Redmond that were working with them, and, and then just kind of got scattered around because they didn't know what else to do with them. And I didn't realize either, but, there have been a handful of pictures of these that have cropped up, and most people are like, yeah, I got it from somebody who worked on the game kind of thing, and didn't realize it had kind of a holy grail status.
Yeah.
This was an official toy. It was official. It was from Microsoft, but it was only a test run of it. And somebody, went to the trouble to design this thing, have it printed up. This was colored. They had the Age of Empires logo on it and all that. But then to say, we can't do this because there's a team there that was responsible for, creating all the packaging and everything for the collector's edition. And the Ensemble didn't really have anything to do with that. That was all marketing side that Microsoft took care of. So yeah, I was a little surprised at the interest that one particular item garnered. That people laser beamed in on it.
I mean, do you think it would have been successful if they released a toy range? I mean, we'll never know for certain.
You would have, it would actually be pretty aggressive to go into the toy space because you would probably, you'd have to make other themed toys. Now you're probably talking, children's toys, of like the various units. And there's the whole, at that point you're practically competing with Hasbro. And True. Then, you have to have parents that are like, oh, that encourages war or this or that. I later actually worked on toys for the Walt Disney Corporation.
Oh, wow.
Back 2013 to 2016. I worked on a line of toys called the Playmation toys, which were well received. We got to work with the Marvel Avengers intellectual property. And after the first ones were released, the Hulk Gamma Gear, the Iron Man Repulsor Blaster, and so on, and these different pieces could interact. The whole product line was canceled at the same time they canceled Disney Infinity, and the entire team was just laid off. Kind of get us out of the blue. And but I do remember from learning there, because we were actually working with Hasbro and other subcontractors in China. That's an entire another world. Yeah. I'm just saying my experience from what I saw there, to make a line of Age of Empires toys would have been big commitment, and I don't think Microsoft was quite as experienced or ready to actually try to go into the space of toys because of the established players. It's big business worldwide, and Microsoft, it has to actually have the idea that we want to do this. Now, will there be small little one-off toys that they sell in the stores or license? Probably, and that typically happens when other companies come to them wanting to use the license because they have an idea for the toys. Often this is how that would come about. But I don't think there was really a line of things for the toys. I think I'm quite certain what it was is the people who were putting together the collector's edition said, we want to do something cool.
Yeah.
And Age of Empires was big enough and well loved enough back then. They're like, they got we'll give you the budget, and enough for them to go ahead and have the toy designed and have an actual production run, test run made and whatnot. Good. So that was pretty cool. But I don't think there were at that time. I don't think they were inside of Microsoft thinking, and we're going to spin up a toy division. I would say that actually wasn't going to happen, given how serious a business thing that would be. That would have had to have come from further on up. And Microsoft wants to stick to what they think they do well. The areas that they feel that they belong in, and I don't think they would have gone there. So
no, fair enough. Well, Matt, can I ask you actually? You've put these on auction now. Have you sold all of them now? Is there still stuff to go on? And can I ask what got the biggest bid, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, so they were all sold. And the auctions were all done, set to go, and they all ended in a 15-minute time span. And the toy trebuchet was responsible for about 50% of the entire auction winnings.
Wow!
It sold for over $600.
Amazing.
And in total, we raised, after eBay's fees, we raised $1,220, which was donated to various no-kill animal shelters and rescue organizations. This year, it was the Perfect Pals in the greater Seattle area, cat rescue organization, and the Romanian dog rescue organization, Howl of a Dog, this year. And both of them have received, I think, $615 donations from us. And in past years, just coming individually, our donations were typically $100, $200. I have to throw out a gigantic shout out to anybody listening, especially anybody who was involved in all of those. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. I mean, that was a generous thing to do. I know not everybody agreed with the choice of the charities, but it is what it is. A lot of people do appreciate it. I mean, anybody who's ever had a pet, a cat or a dog in their life or whatever, I think can certainly get behind that. Helping out these animals that depend on us. So anyway, enough of the getting sappy about all that. But yeah, it surprised me. I thought the trebuchet would be good. I thought maybe this will go for $150, $200 alone. And but boy, there were a couple of people that really wanted it, really slugged it out, and it blows me away that there are fans. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised because there's as we know, they're fans of the game are worldwide, and many people have the resources to whom the money isn't a big deal to them. But having this connection to the game, limited connection to the to the game and the original collector's edition and everything else and whatnot and it's just plain, and they think it's just plain cool. I want a toy trebuchet that flings balls across my desk or something, and there we go. And so I'm really glad that people are able to do that. And there were a number of other items, and it seemed like everybody who's received them has been pretty darn happy with them.
Well, Matt, credit it's due, because you could have just sat on those products. You could have kept them in your basement, whatever. But it's gone for what, for me, at least, sounds like great charities, and respect where it's due. And I mean, you basically destroyed Facebook, didn't you? I saw some of the threads you put on, and it was like, wow, my Facebook, boom, 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 we can't cope. So credit to the Facebook. It's called the Age of Empires Wallow Posting Group. They're a nice bunch, aren't they?
They really are. And I have to say this about interaction with so many of the people, yourself and everybody else. To this day, I'm still humbled when I meet fans of it, because, and as I tell everybody, it's because of people and their fandom and everything that I, and other people at Ensemble Studios and Forgotten Empires and even Hidden Path, that whatnot, everywhere that's been involved with the series, they've gotten to do what they've gotten to do. It's been because of the fans, the players, that have gone out and purchased the game and supported the game and given the feedback and made it stand out in what's now, there's so many games out there today, and there's so many good games even, to have something that has that kind of cachet and standout like Age of Empires it's truly remarkable. And I remind myself to try to be very humble about it, that yes, we worked hard, yes, we created our own luck, but there is, a portion of luck, and there needs to be a portion of grace. I've lost track of how many times somebody has told me about, something like, this inspired me to actually, crack down and pay attention to my history studies, or somebody telling stories of, I used to play this with my dad, and he played it up until he passed away or something like that. You got a tear in your eye, and, and you're like, wow, what do you say to, you had an impact on somebody's life and you didn't even know it. And the best you can do is be humble and thankful and remind yourself, not to get cocky about it. And because it's the other people that have allowed me to, do this and, to do these things interestingly and to work on a product that I loved and so on, that it's really them. And, and honestly, not to diss them or anything like that, but it's not even Microsoft, because if the game went out and didn't really sell and nobody cared and would be kind of forgotten because, their move on. It was the end users and the players that made it what it is in the community that's formed and the interest. I've seen a lot of games, but very, very few games have managed to do what the Age of Empires series has done in people's hearts and mind, and credit to all the rest of the teams, the great guys that I've worked with, and so on, has to be spread around. I don't think there's any one person for whom all the success should be deemed to, or anything like that. Yeah. Again, just got to be humble and just glad that I was allowed to play my part and that it was rewarding to do so.
Well, it's often regarded by many as one of the most important games of all time. Such an important series, not just in the RTS genre, but in gaming in general. So it's amazing, really. Matt, if it's cool, I've got a few questions I took from that Facebook group. I said we're going to ask a few questions here. A lot of sort of quick fire questions. Some are a little bit silly, but if you're up for it, I've got some Wallo posting questions. Is that all right?
Okay, let's go for it.
Right. So the first question is, what's your favourite unit in any of the Age of Empire universe?
Well, I have to admit, I played an overpowering unit way too often in Age 1. And that would have been the Hittites with their upgraded, their all the way upgraded mounted archers. I'm trying to think of them, the cavalry archers. And those guys had some bonuses that I frequently abused way too much. Probably one of the coolest units from Age 2, was Pritchard, going and, having a swarm of them descend upon an enemy city and blowing everything up in sight. Maybe that's just the little boy and me blowing things up that, with glee with those. In my heart, it's kind of ignored a lot, but probably in one category, that would be the Stormy Dog unit, the cheat unit, only because I've only owned one dog in my entire life, and he was a rescue, and I personally rescued him. He and his siblings had been dumped by a puppy mill down into the sewers, and it took me 3 nights and days to get him out of there. And then this happened about January 15th, 1997, just as we were starting up the crunch on Age of Empires 1. And he was my good companion through the very rough years I had in the 2000 and through my divorce and everything else. And, so kind of like a boy and his dog. So I was happy I was able to just sneak in a little memorial tribute to him in Age 2. I know there wasn't any time to really give him any power to do anything like some of the other units or anything cool. So it's kind of like a little private little thing for that. So there's the practical units from Age 1 and Age 2, and then there's kind of the moral unit, which isn't really a fair question because there's this very personal backstory to it. So.
Oh, Matt, I appreciate the honesty. How about I must pronounce this right because it's probably people shouting at me right now. What inspired the priest saying, "Is it Wolololo"? I just
that came from, I believe, Chris Rippey. So the Rippey brothers, working on Age 1. Dave Rippey, they were all musicians. They'd grown up as a musical family kind of thing. But Dave Rippey would work with Tony at Ensemble Corp narration, and he did a lot of producer roles items and was involved with that. Although also they all played instruments at the release party too, at the band. But Chris Rippey handled most of the sound effect of the voice. That's his voice saying Rogan, and I know it's out there on the web, like the story where some of those things came from, where Steven actually composed the soundtrack and the music for that.
Oh, cool.
For these, and these guys, very brilliant with that. So the actual Wolo, I would have to ask him, but we had that sound pretty early on, I think, because it came up with a pretty good sound. We had to have a language that was sort of language neutral. We didn't have the localized language of voice effects, voice recording until the age 2, where we had the bigger budget and can hire proper voice actors, although I know we got criticized for some of them. Your Scotsman does not sound like a Scotsman at all, and I know Scotsman, and a lot of those with that. But I truly don't know the full story for that. I do know that we had that on there, and I fear that some of these I won't necessarily know.
Oh, no, fair enough.
But I can give it a try. Because a lot of these things were individual contributions from individual people. Best way to say a lot of unique unit or like cheat units and things like that, and individual people came up with them and
fair enough.
Insert them in.
Okay, so next question is, what's the story behind how do you turn this on?
What did that do? I'm trying to remember. I don't remember, but you might jog my memory.
I'm not totally sure, actually, Matt. I've just got it from the questions, but I think...
that would have been the Cobra car. And that was from lead artist Scott Winsett. And I think that was a unit he created the artwork for. So one of the things you'll find is that the cheat codes in the first game especially, most of them came from the artists because they had the spare time to actually create the visual assets to go with them. For the programmers, you don't want to see programmer art in the games. Just trust me on that. And and they were able to create that. But that Scott Winsett was something kind of a good old boy, and he had a couple of racing cars that he towed on his truck out, and not quite NASCAR or whatever. But that very much was a muscle car kind of thing that I think he wanted, and so he got to insert that in the game. So that came from him. That came from his passion of having cars and racing, and then if I remember right, then of course once you're in the Age of Empires unit database, we're like, okay, we can add it. Shoots a projectile. Projectile does a totally unfair amount of damage. Has an incredible range. We can set the speed up here so fast that it practically breaks the moving system, so it looks like it turns really strangely or something like that. All the parameters in terms of creating it. A lot of it, the game was really data driven, so again, a lot of it was impinged on the assets, so they were able to create a lot of things without needing a lot of programmer intervention. But at least who's responsible for that, and maybe he could be interviewed for what were you thinking, or what were you drinking when you came up with that?
This might be a similar answer because it's again quite wacky. But how about Furious the Monkey Boy? Any stories behind that?
I believe so. That was I think the little gorilla unit from Duncan McKissick, one of the artists. He's a very good guy. He had actually done a brief stint at Origin Systems down in Austin before coming up Ensemble. He's around there from the beginning. And that was, I think, the part of I want to say his son. And correct me if I'm wrong, Duncan. I don't mean to just hear anything, but I could swear their son was named Furious Woad McKissick, and that was a reference to his baby boy. And I imagine his baby boy at that point was kind of getting to be a little terror or something. I
love it.
And so that is probably, if it is not accurate, that is probably pretty close to it.
Yeah. Oh, I love the little stories. How about this? It's probably a yes or no answer, really. I don't think you even know the answer, Matt. But does the blood on Lahira's sword ever go dry?
I do not think so. I do not think so. But as I'd have to look, literally, the proper answer to that might require, looking. I think that's part of the legend behind it. But that would actually require looking in the code to see if there's like any recharge time or anything like that. Looking at the code and the data to see how is this actually configured to see if there's something in the game that would represent that. But I'm going to go with a no.
Oh, brilliant. I think you've already answered the next question, Matt, but it's just asking, what do you think, were you surprised by how some methods that pro players are using in the game today to defeat levels, defeat opponents? I think you kind of would answer that, but are you still shocked by some of the new strategies people use?
I am amazed that it still continues to evolve. As I said earlier, we found out that, once it was released to players, they were using it in ways and seeing things and sometimes just playing on a sheer level, far beyond what most of us could see, which was also, the baseline we used when we're creating it and playtesting and trying to come up with balanced. We're balancing it for our okay level of skill. And then, the elite, and the interesting thing also that we didn't know at the time in the late 90s was the prevalence of streaming and recording games. So we added record games to age 2, part of his feedback, and how they would be put out and studied, that you would have, a championship elite player who could, win in a tournament and his games out there for everybody to study and analyze and go on, so yes, we were very, very surprised. And also, again, pointing out the timetable of the games where we didn't anticipate, the culture that kind of has come out of not just Age of Empires, but sort of all games to which, you can stream it and, and carefully analyze what exactly happened. So, yeah.
No, good stuff. Someone asked here about the voice acting. How was it done? He doesn't ask, or she doesn't ask specifically what game it is, but what was the inspiration for such lines such as who was behind 11, for example?
Oh, gosh. So, again, going back to Chris Rippey and company, so the taunts and the WAV files that we could play, I'm trying to remember when we came up with that, but I remember it was a big deal because we'd be playing in the office, and we could hear each other's speakers in the background, and we'd be spamming each other with the various, with the various stuff as we're waiting in the lobby to start. And I want to say it was Chris Rippey. Maybe Mark Toronto helped out with that. But, the idea that, hey, we should have a bunch of pre-recorded audio clips and, you can just put the number for them in chat, for a shorthand. And so, again, it would have probably fallen on Chris as far as actually making the recordings. Any recorded voices, sound effects, weapons clinking against each other and so on. That was his domain. I say that, because one, his older brother Dave was really, he was tied. He may have helped out. Dave may have helped out, but he was really tied down with a lot of production duties and management duties. And his younger brother Steven, not only was he working the soundtrack, he was still finishing up his degree at the University of Texas in Austin at the time on H1. So, he had the whole, I got to graduate. I'm kind of, busy full time, but I'm going to write an entire soundtrack while I'm at it too here. And very incredible. He's a great guy. He still continues to do soundtracks to this day, I believe. But in terms of who had the time and was positioned to do that, again, put that down to Chris Rippey for coming up with that. And given the resources available, he was a very resourceful audio engineer on that. And I couldn't be happier with his results. So.
Brilliant. Well, I'll say thank you again to the Facebook group. They are brilliant. I said I was going to interview you. They responded in droves, as you can imagine. So credit where it's due. So it's the Wallow Lolo posting or the Wallow Facebook group. So please join. It's a good place to be. Matt, I've got to ask actually, did you ever start any work on any games, Age of Empires or anything like that you started work on but was never released?
Well, like most people who've been in the game industry for a long time, releasing games is more the exception than the starting the games not. So I will. So at Ensemble Studios, after we shipped Age 1 for a brief little while, I think I still have a few documents related to it somewhere buried. Tim Dean and I, for a while, worked on a game using the same engine, the Genie engine, that was going to be a fantasy spellcasting game, sort of real time, kind of not quite like Diablo. Diablo hadn't quite hit yet, I think. It was called Sorcerer internally. And we started down that path, creating, dungeon-like environments and being able to move. And I was working on seeing if we could do 16-bit graphics instead of 8-bit graphics. But that didn't go very far. And, we were back on Age 1 expansion pack and Age 2. But that had always been, I told you there was a second team after Microsoft had acquired the studio, working on working on Xbox games, and we did all sorts of simple little prototypes. We had I remember a game involving pirates, sailing their ships to islands and looking for loot on little deserted islands and stuff. We were, briefly looking at build a Mars base game. We were so many things were started down ideas. We're looking to see, trying to explore where some creativity might, meet some designs that we thought were solid and that we could pursue for Greenlight. And that was just an ensemble. It pretty much every company I've been at, there have been some. In fact, there's actually a bit of a thing that has to do with the definitive editions. I worked on the Age of Kings HD edition that came out, and I had to leave the company at the end. A bit of a long story there, but moved on from Hidden Path, and they're great guys over at Hidden Path. When it was released, which unfortunately, the game then went on over to Skybox, so I had to stay there. But I got hooked up with the Forgotten Empires guys, early on. This was 2013, 2014-ish. And we actually were working on our own retro RTS when Microsoft came calling in 2016 saying, hey, we got this idea of remastering the first game and doing Age of Empires 1 Definitive Edition. Yeah. And so actually some of the graphics technology and whatnot that we had been developing ourselves, we are choosing some we were working on some very particular things because we wanted a certain sort of feel to do a modern game, but to have a retro feel to it. But if you actually have played the original Age 1 in all of its 256 color glory, you realize it's a little bit lacking 25 years later. So we actually took some of the technical visual advancements and some of the other things, and they were seen in Age 1 Definitive Edition, Age 2 Definitive Edition. Again, the graphics engines are my design, although I know some other people have since moved on from all that. Age 2 Definitive Editions being the engineering is no longer done by Forgotten Empires, and I know they've done something. But if you look at the visual design Age 1 and Age 2, and the glorious looking buildings and everything else, again, I'm responsible for that. That came out of the genesis of that was stuff that Forgotten Empires, because we had actually back up. We had actually contacted Microsoft and say, hey, you have any interest in redoing Age 1? And they're like, nope. And we're like, well, you know what? Why don't we work on our own and maybe shop it around? And we were starting to make some progress, some decent progress on that. And actually, when Microsoft came calling, some of the guys flew over. They were not in the United States at the time. They flew over from Europe. We got everybody together. We went into Microsoft and we gave them a heck of a PowerPoint presentation. We showed them, here's all the visual upgrades we can do. Here's this tech we've been working on. This is what it'll make it look like. And showed them, this is our vision. We can make this thing look modern, yet at the same time, exact feel. There's sometimes you see a remaster where you don't feel the connection to the original.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And so we were, and because of our love of Age and all that, and my interest in the graphics technology, we were very, it's why we're still kind of sprite based, but we were doing things with it that, kind of that other people weren't doing, so that it would have its own sort of, really unique look to it. And I think, Age 1 Definitive Edition, it is a little weaker than what's been come to expect in some ways because it never was, a modern era RTS. It really is it's the original code base still underneath it, but you got to admit that, boy, if you saw those visuals in 1997, you'd probably faint. They're just, but it's still that game. It has 1 foot firmly in the past, but 1 foot very firmly in the present, and we're kind of proud of that.
Oh, nice one. No, Matt.
But anyway, sorry about that. But I was saying, yeah, we were working on an RTS game. We're since not doing it at this time. There doesn't seem to be enough interest out there. If some publisher's listening to this and feels like you have a hole in your RTS lineup, contact the Forgotten Empires and we'll talk to you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I love the RTS genre. I think it needs there is still games out there, but I think there's still room for more. Personally, definitely. Speaking of future RTS games, Age of Empires 4 has been announced. It's going to be released. I can't remember exactly when. You may know better than me, Matt. But what are your views on this? And are you involved in this project at all, or what are your opinions about it?
No, in all of Forgotten Empires was not involved. It's kind of funny, but unfortunately, the way things tend to work, especially with Microsoft, is they're really sort of secretive. We knew about Age of Empires 4 at Forgotten Empires because of the leaks about it before. Microsoft, who we're working with, is willing to tell us that before they felt they could even admit that it existed. And we're like, we know you were working on Age 4. We're hearing all, the rumor mill's going, no. And, and they just couldn't do that because they're a big company. It's the way they operate with all that. But no, we don't, Relic's doing that. And I believe it's Relic, right? Is doing Age of Empires 4?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's their own thing. The thing to realize is, again, for Forgotten Empires and whatnot, we don't own the Age of Empires IP. That's Microsoft's baby. So Microsoft, a very big company, has to think about what they're doing with it, and they have to think about it in context of their future plans for Windows, their future plans for Xbox, their future plan for their game division, and so on. That's one of the things that led to the decision that the Age of Empires 1 Definitive Edition was originally released as a UWP on the Microsoft Store only for a while. It took the guys on the team there a while to sort of convince them we need to release this on Steam also too. Mm-hmm. But it's a way of saying that, hey, it's a really big company. They own it. They've got plans for it and visions of people working on it and all that. And those of us who were originally involved with it, those of us involved with the remasters, really didn't have any part of that. We know that there's 4 going on. What I've seen so far, I'm kind of holding judgment on it. I mean, there's definitely, I'll put it this way, the Relic guys have a lot of pressure on them when you're coming into a franchise in all of its players and all of its expectations. I saw some beautiful stuff in there. I saw some stuff that was different. It's one of those, I think I need to wait and see and actually, play the game or a demo or something like that before I can really assess, because it's possible to make an RTS game that is looked in a medieval setting or the settings they have, but it not feel like an Age of Empires game. What is this nebulous feels like an Age of Empires game out of all the games that are, RTS games that are out there. It's kind of hard to define, and it's one of those, I rather than try to cast judgment based on some short video clips or and some still shots, want to see what the final product can do, what the team can do, kind of, and I'll have my own personal opinions of whether it's a, like, oh man, this is truly, the spiritual successor, as well as, the next logical successor in the IP. They'll like it, and it'll be like, does this capture more of the feel of like Age 3 or Age 2 or Age 1 or Age Myth, or is it its own beast? You got to kind of find out when you play it. I mean, and again, that's kind of from the point of a player that finesses with opinion. Like you have some people who of all the first person shooters out there, some people are they're like wine snobs. This vintage shooter should have been good except for just the flavor of the enemies just isn't, or the weapons just don't have enough sound, enough meat to the sound, and debating esoteric points. I try not to be like that. I wish the guys and the team all the best success with it.
Good on you.
It's like I said, it's not easy. It helps and it hurts to work within an existing intellectual property. Yeah. And it creates some challenges. So, but I got to think that there's a lot of inspired, dedicated people there, and got to be some people there that really do get it. And this, I said much earlier, it comes down to execution. I want to see the final product. One thing I've learned not to do is to pass judgments on a beta or an alpha prematurely, and because that's really unfair to the team and everybody involved with it.
Love it. Matt, look, we've just a couple of last minute questions. Really appreciate the time. I mean, we've had on Arcade Attack Ed Freeze, Bruce Shelley. We've had Dave Pottinger on a text interview. I mean, we spoke to some real legends, and you've worked with huge people. You've made a huge impact in the gaming industry. How do you reflect back on that particular team, that time of your life, and how do you reflect back on your career?
Well, I'll be honest. I was fortunate. I was in the right place at the right time, and I brought the right skills to the table. To Age of Empires 1, and Age of Empires 2, to be honest, I got to be a big part of it. I'll give you an example by comparison. I got to work at Valve for a few years. It was a really great time there, and I got to work on some of their titles. But my contributions to their titles is just a tiny fraction of a % of the overall thing. With Age of Empires 1 and 2 especially, I got to create a substantial part of the foundation of it. And that is something that most people don't get to do. Remember the whole thing about the whole no middleware and all of that? And, I can point to, a double-digit % of the code and whatnot that I created. I can point to whole systems that were my design, file formats, and things like that. And, So I felt, all of us there were at a time, sort of a magical place in time, a gathering, sort of the early era of the modern Windows gaming, and we're able to make outsized contributions to the final product relative to what most people get to do nowadays for what is, a AAA title. And the size of AAA titles were smaller. We didn't have to worry about achievements and cloud saves and some of the stuff you expect to be standard today too. So the scope was a little more restrained in too. And so I look back at that fortune. I also think that there was some kind of magic to the team formation. At that time, this was sort of before getting into the game industry was as popular as it was. So. And we went through a number of people. Not everybody that applied at Ensemble got hired. And again, remember my comment about the giving a panel discussion on our hiring practices. But the people that we brought on board were all very passionate, capable, and they were all we had to kind of invent a lot of it as we went on. I got to to write about techniques that I that I came up with and see them published, and I've actually seen them later on. I've seen an academic paper come out and find my name referred to in it, as a source material, guy who did this and that, and flattering. Although we were just trying to do what we had to do then, so I both fortunate, but at the same time, I got to acknowledge, I'd had that passion going back, as I talked about, to the late 70s and the 80s. I always had that passion burning. I got to work with other people who had that passion burning. So it was a combination of both the effort, really good effort put forth, the people, but also, the kind of holistically the whole thing. It wasn't just that we had great technical people or great artists. Also, the management of the studio did a fantastic job of aligning everybody's interest on the product. You come into some big companies, you have to worry about corporate politics, for example. There we didn't really have that. We were small, lean, and very hyper focused on what we were creating, and that's a hard experience to reproduce. And also, because we were at that dawn of the RTS genre, that 50 games coming out next year kind of thing, the rules weren't really even figured out. We actually got to write some of the rules for the RTS genre. You'll remember I made the comment about dropping into the game the feature of sharing line of sight between people in multiplayer. That was actually ours was the first game that did that. I'm still really annoyed at the writer for one of the gaming magazines that said Blizzard did that first. He did not like Age, but it's kind of a we got in the process of creating something, we didn't realize we were kind of creating some of the standards for the genres. In many ways, from the design, unit interaction, things and so on. So being at that early time, it'd be like, I'll give you a great example. A fellow I worked with who came on board at the end of H1, our network programmer on H2, a guy by the name of Paul Bettner. People might know him. He went on and created a company called New Toy, and they had a little iPhone app most people haven't heard of called Words with Friends.
That's huge.
Yes, but he got started there. He had the vision for that back in 2008.
Oh, wow.
and started out with his brother on the infrastructure. They actually had a Chess with Friends first, then Words with Friends. Again, part of being in the right time. If he had tried to do that a decade later, probably wouldn't have been the big deal. So there's a combination of both having the vision, and again, credit the original guys from Bruce and Tony and Rick and Brian and everybody, to make a studio, to make a game, to being at the right place at the right time. But you don't know you're at the right place at the right time when you're there. You only get to go back in hindsight and say, oh, wow, the whole industry was changing and it was taking off. And so you're fortunate to be there, but it's also because you worked your tail off. You competed. You were inspired by all the competition to do even better. So it's it's kind of when all those things when all that converges, then you have a chance often at coming up with something that really lasts unusually long or is well received as Age was. So I don't know if that quite answers the question, but trying to explain. But I'm very aware that there was a special time, and I consider myself very fortunate I was able to try and make the very best of it.
Oh, well, that's a brilliant answer, Matt. I've got two final questions, and I'll pinch myself if I don't get a chance to ask you this. And it's not on my question list, so I apologise. But you probably don't know the answer, or you may just be it might be a guess your end. But do you think, because you obviously worked at Valve, and I could ask loads of questions about that, huge fan of their games. Do you think we're ever going to see Half-Life 3?
I was about to answer. I know nothing about the number 3. Nothing about the number 3. The guys at Valve have an interesting challenge. It is known, they've looked at continuing Half-Life, but they also recognize the bar that they've set, and then also getting the way Valve's processes are very interesting internally to build the internal consensus that this is worth pursuing and organically. And that I'll say this about their process, it's part of the strength of the company. It's why their games that they release do come out so good. I have to say, I'm really looking forward to seeing Half-Life Alyx. Yes. My son is really looking forward to playing it, and I'm curious if that, it's the time to come down and revisit it. Maybe it's the shift, the format to it that may bring it about, to people seeing a true Half-Life 3 or not. I can't really speculate on it, and I absolutely cannot disclose anything that I might know from friends that are still there, as I'm on very good terms with them, and people that are still there. I still visit with them. Their offices are literally. I'm looking out the window right now. I think they're about 4 or 5 miles straight in the direction I'm looking at. It's going to be up to them. It's a complicated thing, but we might. It's a fair thing to say. You can't say no. But if they're going to do it, if they're going to create such a thing, they're going to make it worth our while.
Oh yes,
I can guarantee you that. They're in a position where they're not in a position where, well, we have to get something out by Christmas or else, or anything like that. They're not. They're very well aware. We got a lot to answer for if we go down this road. I think, again, I said Half-Life Alyx, I think will kind of help set the tone. And if it is, and if it is all the things I'm hearing about it on here, maybe it's time for it to come around, and maybe it's not even a 3, but maybe it's yet another exploration in the Half-Life universe. I know people have been wondering, are the Portal and Half-Life universes connected and stuff? And it's really hard to say, but I can say this: the guys there, incredibly great crew over there, and if internally, if they figure out something and it catches fire over there, they will do it. There's nothing going to be stopping them. And I've seen things over there where, things sort of catch fire internally, and usually it winds up to great things. And it's one of the beautiful things about Valve is, you probably heard they have a pretty flat management structure. Yeah. They allow a lot of things to come from people. In some companies, design and everything is very top down, but anybody there might be the one who sees something of great importance. I'll give you an example. Adrian Fennell was responsible for, at least because I interacted with him right that was starting, Dota 2.
Yeah.
He was working on the very first prototype. He was so passionate about it. And in Valve, he had the freedom and the track, and the respect of his peers to go off and get started working on the prototype. I got pulled in on it. I actually worked a little bit on it to help give it some more RTS style pathing and movement. Going on my experience with Age of Empires, because we needed to be, because Dota was, based off of an RTS platform, and it didn't come from top down. There wasn't a product planning meeting saying, what do we need to, fill out the space in our product plan next year? None of that. The fire came up internally, and I saw, it caught fire, and now it's, it's become the esports juggernaut that it is. And Valve walks a tightrope, and they do it pretty well, to when it happens, to let the stuff go, to explore these things coming up from all directions and see if they're worthwhile. It's why they do things like, hey, there's this mod team out there creating this Nabacular drop, and Gabe and everybody are like, let's bring them on board and see what they can do. And then next thing you know, the world's got Portal. And so I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm hopeful, having seen from the inside how they work. I'm hopeful, but I know that they will pursue it all the way through if they can figure out how to really deliver in a way that's going to be for people. What you're not going to get is a cheap cash in, or cash grab or something like that. They just have no interest and no reason to do so. Sorry for the long-winded answer about that.
No, I really appreciate it. And I'm a huge Half-Life fan, and I love getting the insight as well. I know this has been a very Age of Empire heavy interview, but obviously Valve, another huge company you work for. I mean, it's pretty crazy, isn't it, Matt? Fair play to you.
It's pretty crazy. I have to say it was that and Ensemble have been my two greatest employer experiences. I learned a ton while I was at Valve, and I've got nothing but respect for those guys. And that's beside the fact that I still occasionally keep bumping into people from there. So it's but in all seriousness, they occupy a pretty unique niche out there in the industry, and and they want to do great things. So, because look at how they have brought, how they have furthered pushing VR out into mainstream gaming, just through the hardware and everything else. So, got to give them credit.
No, well, Matt, look, brilliant interview. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I've got one sort of silly final question to wrap things up, but I really do appreciate your time today. Such really, really great answers, and I really appreciate your time. If you could share a few drinks of any video game character, who would you choose and why? That's how we're going to end the interview.
Oh my. Okay, now that one threw me for a loop. Now, the characters, it's kind of unfair because it started out like who have been influential characters. If I'd share a drink with the Doom guy, but I don't know that he'd have much to say but grunt. I'd share a drink with the Vault Dweller from Fallout, but I'm not sure what their character stats would be. How I don't want them to get alcohol addiction or poisoning with that. On kind of a more fanciful sort of thing. So what would the characters have to tell me? Would Mario or Sonic have great stories to to tell me? I can actually I'll put it sort of this way: is that as I played games and I played various games over the years, you wind up wondering about the stories in sometimes in unexpected ways. I'm going to share with you. So a game I played just recently in the last week, Far Lone Sales.
Right.
And it was a very different sort of experience. And there's a character in there. I don't know the character's name. I don't even know if it's a young boy or a young girl because their head is covered and things like that. And it's like kind of like gosh, it's rather than the character. I'd like to sit down with the designer and say, where did you come up with this? I've had a chance to meet and talk with various designers over the years and ask them about how they got inspired from early on, like getting a chance to talk with Richard Garriott, about the creation of the Ultima series, or people like Warren Spector, or I talk about my love of the Fallout games. I actually tried to get a Fallout designer, Chris Avallone, to interview at Ensemble Studios back in the early 2000s. And still occasionally bump into him today. And I guess it would be sort of like any of the people. We're in an amazing time for game content in new games out there, and occasionally you find gems. And I'm referring to Fire Lone Sales here most recently, and I'm like, wow, how did this game come about? Like it was more of an experience than a game, but yet it was still like, I'm still amazed after all these years. People are coming up with very, very creative things, sometimes totally unexpected. And there's so many people I'd love to ask. The guy responsible for a Kerbal Space Program, which another game my son absolutely loves and has invested way too many hours. And I'm like, and my son and I have, we got a pact. Next time we can figure out when there's going to be a Falcon Heavy launch, we're going to go to Florida, hopefully, to watch it and stuff like that. And part of that, I think, it's Kerbal Space Program. And they're like, I would want to ask the original designer, like, what gave you the inspiration? So
question.
Maybe not so much the characters, but I find myself, the characters in the universe we kind of know about, but the people who made them came up with some of these experiences. I have to admit, I'm as much a fanboy as anybody else of so many things, and I'd love to hear how things came about, and so on, because I consider myself kind of a hack, really. And I know it's the imposter syndrome thing going on. I look at other people and I'm like, how did you get inspired to this, or how did you get inspired to that? And I have been fortunate that I've gotten to meet a lot of my heroes over the years. I've gotten to hang out with John Romero and John Carmack before, and things like, from early on, and people who've been responsible for influential games, and so here and there from being inside the industry. And not because I'm anybody special, but just because I'm so old and I've been around enough that I keep bumping into people. So I guess that's the best kind of answer that I can do. And then the other thing is, as you get older, you can't quite drink as much as you used to when you were a young lad. So
a couple of chilled beers, yeah. Look, Matt, you're a real legend in my eyes, very humble, and I really do appreciate your answers today. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me on. And again, I'm just humbled that anybody's still interested in this after all these years. I think I can add one little tidbit that I don't think, and I think this was from questions we discussed before. I don't think anybody on the team originally expected it to turn into what it was, or that it would even be the sales success that it was. And I can share a little story on the way out the finish this up. In that we were originally hoping to sell. We needed to sell, I think, 300 to 330,000 copies of Age of Empires 1 to break even. When I told you in the last couple of months, we knew we were onto something kind of special. And I remember we were out to lunch with a couple of people from Microsoft. Stuart Mulder from Microsoft was down with us. Tim Zananachek was also down. And we were all out to lunch talking about our hopes for that. And Stuart said, I'm going out on a limb here, and he predicted we were going to sell 535,000 copies. Now, he was off by about a factor of 10. It is a way of saying, even our best guesses with people at Microsoft and, with access to marketing data and marketing plans, we didn't know this was going to blow up this big. Yeah. And so to some extent, how can you not be just kind of, like I said, humbled, grateful, fortunate, to have been part of something that turned out to be so special.
That's a brilliant way to finish the interview, Matt. I mean, you involved one of the most important games of all time, and, well, I think those numbers talk for themselves. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on, and I'll still be found around from time to time there in the Facebook group. So if people listening to this absolutely have to ask a question, I do actually try to answer those out there.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch regarding this week's episode or anything else, you can tweet us at Arcade Attack UK, at Keith Barlow 82, and at Arcade_Adriano. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/Arcade Attack UK. Please check out our website at arcadeattack.co.uk for lots of retro gaming goodness, interviews, reviews, features, top 10s, etc. And you can also find all our previous podcasts there. Our podcasts are available to stream from the